In the heart of the ancient Igodo kingdom, where kings dined on gold plates and oracles spoke in riddles, there lived a curse that the winds refused to carry. A curse so potent it waited patiently for the moment of celebration to strike. This is the tale of the cursed festival, and of the king's meal that no soul ever digested past midnight. The kingdom of Igodo was known across valleys and rivers for its grand moon harvest festival, a week-long celebration held every 7 years under the glow of the full moon. Villages across the kingdom would empty into the palace square, where stories were traded like cowries, and roasted goat filled the air like perfume. It was said that the gods themselves descended to taste the food. And in the center of this festival stood King Ijobu, a ruler whose pride was larger than his empire. Tall, sharp-jawed, with eyes like carved obsidian, Ijobu had ruled Igodo for 32 years with an iron staff and a thirst for legacy. This year's festival was unlike any other. The harvest had been unusually bountiful. Palm wine flowed freely from the trees, and the yam barns overflowed. The king declared, "This shall be the grandest festival in the history of Igodo, and I shall serve a meal the gods themselves will envy." And so, he commissioned a feast that would be remembered for eternity, a royal meal cooked by the high chef of the spirits, an old woman named Mama Ekpenyong, who lived beyond the river Nso, deep in the forest. Many warned him, "The old woman is not a chef, she is a seer, a keeper of forbidden recipes." But the king, blinded by grandeur, sent his guards to summon her. When they returned, they brought not only the woman, but a heavy bound gourd, sealed with cowries and threads made of goat hair. Mama Ekpenyong arrived at the palace without fear, wrapped in a black wrapper, with skin dark and tight as old bark. Her eyes, though cloudy, seemed to see what others could not. "You summoned me," she said, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "Are you ready for what I cook, King Ijobu?" The king laughed, lifting a golden goblet. "Make me a meal that no man forgets, old one, and I will make you the queen's sister." Mama Ekpenyong looked at the crowd gathered in the throne hall. They were cheering, drunk on wine and celebration. "Then it is done," she whispered, placing the gourd on the ground. "But be warned, your majesty. This meal must be eaten only at night. And never, I repeat, never reheated after midnight." Ijobu, ever arrogant, waved her off. "Cook your dish, woman. Tonight we dine with the gods." And so the gourd was opened. The aroma that spilled from the gourd was unlike anything the palace had smelled. A scent of honey, firewood, spices, and something else. Something earthy, deep, and ancient. Mama Ekpenyong cooked behind closed doors. No one was allowed near the fire. She sang as she stirred, her voice not in any known language. The palace cats hissed. The wind shifted. When the meal was finally ready, it was served in black earthen bowls, lined with red string. The king's dish was larger than the rest, decorated with eagle feathers. That night, as drums echoed and dancers spun, the king's guards carried out the meal, the centerpiece of the moon harvest festival. The people of Igodo gathered in thousands. They cheered as King Ijobu raised his bowl high. "Let the gods taste envy," he bellowed before eating the first spoon. And so they all ate. Children, elders, priests, dancers, chiefs, drummers. From the king's table down to the lowliest farmer, all who tasted the king's meal licked their fingers and praised the heavens. They called it Oba's glory stew. But no one knew what was inside. No one asked. They were too drunk on its richness, its flavor, and the joy of the night. Until midnight. In Igodo, the last drumbeat of the festival always sounded at midnight. It marked the end of celebration and the beginning of a new harvest year. This year, as the 10th drumbeat echoed through the moonlight, the sky shifted. The stars dimmed. A sudden chill passed through the crowd. Then it began. The first to fall was Chief Aburo, head of the Eastern clan. His body stiffened like wood, and foam poured from his mouth. Before anyone could cry out, his wife screamed and fell beside him. In moments, the square was filled with gasps, screams, and bodies dropping like flies. Children clutched their throats. Dancers twisted mid-step. Elders fell to their knees, eyes rolled back. Within 10 minutes, over 300 people had collapsed, all those who had eaten the king's meal. King Igodo rose to his feet, staring at the massacre unfolding before him. He turned to his guards. Only 2 stood, the others dead. His bowl, still half full, slipped from his hands and shattered on the marble steps. He turned to Mama Ekpenyong. She stood at the edge of the courtyard, unmoving. "What have you done, witch?" he roared. But she only looked at him and whispered, "You asked for a meal no man forgets. And now, no man who tasted it remains to remember." Lightning cracked. The gourd, now sealed again, began to hum softly. The sound rose until it rang louder than the drums themselves. Igodo fell to his knees. The queen wept over their son, his tiny lips now blue. The palace square smelled of vomit, death, and burnt pepper. The palace courtyard was filled with rows of still, pale bodies. The air reeked of pepper, panic, and decay. Flies had begun their feasting, circling lips and open eyes that would never blink again. King Igodo, cloaked in his royal red, paced furiously across the great hall. His crown sat crooked on his head. His voice was hoarse from shouting, "I want the witch hanged. Bring her to me." But Mama Ekpenyong had vanished. No guard had seen her leave. No horse was taken. The only thing left in her quarters was the sealed gourd, resting on a wooden stool, still humming low, like a heartbeat. The king was afraid to touch it. Yet it pulsed, slow and steady, like something still lived inside. Later that evening, the few survivors gathered in a secret chamber below the palace. They were 10 in number. All of them had refused to eat the king's meal. Some had fasted for religious reasons. Others had simply arrived too late. They called themselves the Marked Ones, not because of what they had done, but because of what they had not done. Among them was Obioma, the orphan girl with silver eyes who cleaned the palace floors. Elder Kaka, the blind herbalist who had once served the Queen Mother. Naji the gatekeeper, whose bowl had shattered before he could taste the stew. Tari the drummer, who had fallen asleep before the meal. They spoke in whispers, lighting herbs for protection. They knew something ancient had been awakened. Elder Kaka spoke first. "This is no ordinary curse. It is a dish of the ancients. The Yukat Inayo, the hunger that eats the soul." The room fell silent. Bioma shivered. "But why feed it to so many? What does the old woman want?" Kaka sighed. "Not what she wants, child. What was promised to her." Far away from the palace, deeper than the river bends and thicker than the forest roots, Mama Ekpenyong walked barefoot through a shadowed grove. She carried a staff carved from Iboro wood, etched with runes from before time. Her headscarf was gone, revealing white dreadlocks that curled like smoke. She arrived at a circle of stones, 12 in number. In the center was a shallow hole where she placed the gourd. "I have kept my word," she whispered to the dark. "Take your fill and leave me what is owed." The gourd's humming stopped. Then, slowly, it opened itself. Black smoke poured out like a living thing, slithering around the stones, wrapping around Mama Ekpenyong's legs and crawling up her spine. A voice emerged, neither male nor female. "The king's soul. You did not deliver it." She winced. "He did not finish the meal. He threw the last spoon." The voice hissed, "Then you will not be paid in full." 2 nights after the massacre, strange reports began to surface. The bodies of the dead were missing. At first, the guards thought it was grave robbers. But the mausoleum doors had not been forced. There were no tracks, no broken chains, no blood, just emptiness. Elder Kaka, sensing danger, visited the burial site. The tombs were clean, too clean, like they had been swallowed whole. As he placed his palm on the earth, his breath caught in his throat. He turned to the others. "They are not dead. Not truly. The stew, it preserves. Their souls may have left, but their bodies remain. Useful." Bioma stepped forward. "Useful for what?" Kaka looked toward the darkening sky. For a kingdom not of the living. King Ijobu had not slept since the night of the curse. His dreams were filled with laughter from beneath the ground, with his dead wife calling his name through walls. He avoided the royal kitchen. Even the scent of onions turned his stomach. And then, one morning, his reflection did not move with him. He stared into the mirror and it stared back, smiling. Ijobu screamed. He shattered the mirror. But behind each broken shard, the smiling image remained. The royal priest, Amare, arrived trembling. "Your Majesty, you must return the gourd." "To who?" "The witch vanished. The stew is gone." Amare fell to his knees. "Not to the witch. To the river. That stew was never meant for humans. It was an offering. And you interrupted the balance." Ijobu threw his goblet at Amare, who fled, whispering prayers. By the third night, strange sightings haunted the roads of Igodo. Fishermen claimed to see their dead wives walking barefoot along the waterbanks, whispers in their throats and mud on their feet. Hunters found deer with human teeth marks, as if something clumsy had tried to eat the heart. The worst of it came when young boys playing near the yam barn saw something crawl from beneath the soil. Not walk, not run. Crawl like a newborn goat, but with bones that cracked and twisted. They said its face was Chief Aburo's, but his eyes were missing, and his mouth moved in reverse. Obioma, Elder Kaka, and Tari snuck into the palace that night. They had to see the gourd. It was still there, guarded by two lifeless guards who didn't breathe, didn't blink. Their skin had turned a dull gray, as though drained. Obioma whispered a chant taught to her by her late grandmother. The guards did not move. Elder Kaka approached the gourd. Pulsed. "It knows we are here," he said. Suddenly the gourd opened. Not fully. Just a slit. But it was enough for a tendril of smoke to slip out and touch Kaka's face. He staggered back. "It's feeding. Still." Hurry gasped. "But from what?" Kaka whispered, voice cracking. "From fear, from the living. From him." They turned. King Ijobu stood at the doorway, sword in hand, his eyes sunken. "You will not touch it. It is mine. They are all mine." King Ijobu no longer walked the palace corridors like a man. He shuffled. Ragged. His royal robes hung loose around his thinning frame. His eyes had sunk into dark hollows, and strange symbols had begun to form beneath his skin, veins that glowed briefly whenever he touched the gourd. His advisors had either fled or died. Except for one. Amare the priest had returned to the palace in secret, bringing with him a scroll so old that even its ink had begun to bleed. He confronted the king with it, trembling. "Your Majesty, this is older than Igodo itself. It speaks of the Otorabo, the night that repeats itself. You have called it back. Through gluttony, through ignorance. That gourd is no cooking pot. It is a relic. Prison. And now." He was interrupted. Not by the king, but by a knock. From inside the palace wall. It came at exactly midnight. 3 knocks, then silence, then again. The king did not flinch. He stared at Amare with glassy eyes. "They want to come in," he whispered. "Who?" Amare asked. "My people," the king said with a smile. "They're hungry." The knocking grew louder. Not fists, not palms, knuckles, bone on stone. And then the wall cracked. Through the split emerged Aburo the chief, whose face was now hollow, eyes like pits, skin like clay. Behind him more followed, guards, dancers, nobles. All pale, all blinking slowly, all wearing necklaces made of bones. They did not groan. They did not stumble. They waited. And the king said, "Let the feast begin." Meanwhile Obioma, Elder Kaka, and Tari had fled the palace. The whispering gourd could no longer be saved. It had anchored itself to the king, feeding on him and through him. Destroying it would now mean a war. A war not of weapons but of souls. They returned to the village. But the village was no longer safe. Fire raged across 3 compounds. Smoke choked the sky. And yet no screams. Only silence. The villagers had vanished. Or rather, they were now among the marching dead. Naji the gatekeeper met them at the forest edge. His face was bloody. His left hand had been broken and rewrapped in leaves. The dead, they're organized. They don't attack. They collect. They knock, and if you answer, you vanish. What about those who don't answer? Tari asked. They knock again. Louder. Until the door breaks. Obioma clutched her grandmother's charm, a string of dried black beads. We need answers. We need the river. Elder Kaka's eyes widened. Yes, the river spirit. It remembers things even the gourd forgets. At dawn, the marked ones set out for the river Asu, a cursed waterway where ancient sacrifices once kept the balance between life and the underworld. But reaching the river was no easy task. The forest around it had changed. Trees bled sap that smelled like burnt skin. Birds flew in reverse. And shadows whispered words from people they had buried long ago. Still they pressed on. At the water's edge, they found Mama Ekpenyong, alive, kneeling in the river, her back to them. Elder Kaka raised his staff. Witch, you cursed our land. Return what you stole. But she did not turn. She was crying. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The gourd wasn't meant for them. Only for the king. Only him. Then why did you feed it to all? Bioma asked. She whispered, voice cracked. Because the gourd tricked me. Promised me life. But it was not mine to bargain with. Obioma stepped forward and spoke the name her grandmother once told her. Araby. The water trembled. A low moan drifted from beneath the waves. Then the river rose. Not a flood. Not a wave. A shape, human but endless, made of water and roots, eyes like liquid moons. Spoke without speaking. Why do you wake me? Bioma knelt. The gourd eats our souls. We seek to end it. Then you must end its root. What is the root? The spirit paused. Not what? The king is no longer man. He is now the Obioku, the king of corpses. His soul feeds the gourd. His death would free the land. They were silent. Elder Kaka frowned. Killing the king will be seen as treason. We'll be hunted. Then be hunted, or be hollow. And with that the river sank. The marked ones gathered at the shrine of Ojaku, an old warrior god known for blessing righteous rebellions. There they found the red mask of binding, a sacred item said to blind the dead and silence the cursed. They made charms from aburu leaves, prepared knives dipped in the oil of bitter kola, and burned old drums to create ash wards. Their plan was simple. Break into the palace. Trap the gourd using the binding mask. Sever the king's connection. And burn the throne. They had until midnight. Because at midnight, the king was planning another feast. This time for the few villagers who still lived. The palace stood under a sky with no stars. A black wind blew from the east, carrying ash, feathers, and the scent of something buried too long. Obioma, Elder Kaka, Tari, and Naji stood before its great wooden gates, each bearing the charms of the river spirit and the red mask of binding strapped across Obioma's back. The doors were covered in symbols, some ancient, others freshly drawn in blood. Naji muttered, "We don't knock this time. We kick it down." But the door creaked open, on its own. And from inside came a familiar voice. "Come in, my children. The table is set." It was King Ajobu. Inside the palace had changed. No longer gold and marble. Now it was stone and wrought. Every step echoed like a scream. Every painting bled. Every torch flickered with black flame. And at the center, beneath the great dome, sat the king, crowned in skulls, his body barely human. The gourd pulsed beside him on a throne of bones. Around him sat the guests of the feast, nobles, dancers, priests, all dead. But they moved, slowly chewing invisible food. Their teeth clicked in rhythm. "Welcome to the final supper," the king smiled. "You are late." Bioma stepped forward. "We didn't come to eat, Ajobu. We came to bury." The king laughed. Then let me show you the menu. He raised one hand and the dead stood. They came in waves. Silent. Calculated. The dead of Igodo, once lovers, farmers, teachers, now weapons. But the marked ones had come prepared. Naji threw his warding dust into the air. The dead shrieked and burned. Tari used her silver staff, cracking skulls and splashing ancient bile across the floor. Elder Kaka chanted in Onochi, the lost tongue of warders. His words wrapped around them like a shield. Obioma, eyes glowing with river fire, drew the red mask of binding and slammed it into the ground. Pulse exploded. The gourd screamed. So did the king. But it wasn't enough. The king rose. King Ajobu no longer had a face. His skin peeled away as he stepped forward, revealing veins made of ash and bones carved with prayers. His voice echoed in multiple tones. You cannot kill a king chosen by death itself. Obioma faced him. You were not chosen. You stole the throne. You poisoned your people for power. No, the king roared. I saved them. They were weak. The festival was dying. They needed something divine. So you fed them to a god who lies in a gourd. He lunged at her. But as he struck, Obioma placed the red mask on his chest. And for the first time the king screamed in fear. The gourd began to levitate. It hummed louder, deeper, until the palace shook. A crack split through the roof, and black roots erupted from the gourd, snaking toward the marked ones. It wasn't just a vessel. It was a gate, and it was now fully open. From it emerged something ancient. Not a beast, not a spirit. A shadow in the shape of a man, made of smoke, dust, and long-forgotten names. Who dares bind the king of harvests? It growled. Obioma stepped forward, voice trembling. We bind you in the name of Araby. River remembers. River seals. The shadow turned its head. The palace went quiet. Then the shadow whispered. Too late. The red mask began to crack. Obioma fell to her knees, blood pouring from her ears. Tari pulled her away, but the roots grabbed Tari's leg and began to drag her into the gourd. Elder Kaka shouted the final prayer, but the words twisted in his throat, turning into smoke. Naji stood and did what no one expected. He rushed the gourd, drawing his sacred blade. Before it could react, he plunged the knife into his own heart and fell onto the gourd. The blood splashed across it. The roots froze. The shadow screamed. And the gourd cracked. As Naji's soul was pulled into the gourd, the object trembled and then shattered. The king let out a howl not of pain, but of release. His body collapsed into dust, leaving only the crown of skulls behind. The shadow writhed, trying to cling to the palace, but it was no longer bound. It faded into the crack in the earth from where it first rose. The dead dropped where they stood, unmoving at last. The palace burned with blue fire. Obioma, Tari, and Elder Kaka fled, dragging what remained of Naji's blade behind them. By dawn the palace was no more. The three survivors, Obioma, Tari, and Elder Kaka, returned to Igodo not as victors but as remnants. The village stood still, its heart barely beating. The trees were gray, and the air hung thick with grief. Children stared with hollow eyes. No drums, no laughter. Just silence. A shrine had been built in the center of the village. At its base were the names of those who had eaten the cursed meal. And Naji, carved last and deepest. But even now, midnight came too quickly. And each night, another villager vanished. The elders gathered at the village square, their eyes accusing. You destroyed the gourd. You killed the king, one said, voice cracking. So why does the darkness still claim us? Elder Kaka placed his staff on the ground. The gourd was only a gate. The curse did not come from the king, it came from beneath. Obioma's voice trembled. The river gave the warning long ago. before Ajobu, before us all. She walked to the bank of the great river Arabi. The water was no longer clear. It was black thick with memory. And it whispered her name. That night Tari and Obioma went to the river's mouth, where an ancient stone stood, the same stone carved with the tale of Ianma, the goddess of harvest and vengeance. Obioma touched the stone and saw everything. Long before kings, a village had angered Ianma by wasting her bounty, mocking her festivals, poisoning her sacred animals. In her rage she cursed the people. You shall eat and never rest. At midnight, your souls shall belong to the soil. They begged, but she gave only one mercy. If a people feed on pride, then only humility, loss, and blood freely given can break the feast. The prophecy had not been fulfilled, because one thing remained buried. The next morning, Elder Kaka led a search behind the palace ruins. He spoke a forgotten rite and struck the earth with his staff. It bled. They dug for hours, and uncovered a mass grave, wrapped in royal silks. Bones of women, children, the poor. Those King Ajobu sacrificed years before to feed the gourd's hunger and prolong his reign. The ground trembled. The air split. The sun dimmed. These were the first, whispered Obioma. The unburied, the unseen, the truly cursed. And with them, a second gourd sealed in chains, still unbroken, still humming. The people gathered once more. This time not to feast, but to mourn. To acknowledge the sins not of monsters, but of men. Obioma placed the red mask before the second gourd. Elder Kaka removed his staff, and snapped it in half, returning his power to the earth. Tari poured water from the river over the bones. And then, Obioma raised the blade Naji left behind. She whispered, "For Igodo, for truth, for peace." And she cut her palm, bleeding onto the bones, the mask, and the second gourd. The sky cracked. The river roared. The gourd shattered. The black smoke rose. But this time it did not fight. It ascended into the sky like mist returning to the heavens. The sun rose higher than it had in weeks. Birds sang. For the first time since the cursed festival, no one died at midnight. Obioma collapsed in the grass, her blood soaked into the earth. Elder Kaka smiled, tears in his eyes. Tari stood still, listening to the river hum a new song, soft, clear and clean. The shrine in the center of the village was remade. This time not to remember death, but to honor sacrifice. Years later, children of Igodo would gather by the banks of the Arabi to hear the tale. There was a king who fed his people, but not with love, only pride. He gave them poison on golden plates. And at midnight they all died. But from the river came 3 souls. With courage deep and true, they faced the gourd, they gave their blood, and let the land renew. And if you listen closely, even now, the river still sings that song. And it always remembers who fed it, who betrayed it, and who finally made it clean.